in 2015. He's widely published journal articles and book chapters in the subspecialty of shoulder and elbow surgery, and is the current editor-in-chief for Shoulder and Elbow, which is our BESS journal, having previously held the role of associate editor prior to this. So with this background, he's very well positioned to talk to us this evening about how to successfully navigate the submission process and how to approach critical review of a journal article. Our second speaker this evening is Professor Adam Watts. He is a consultant in Wrightington Upper Limb Unit in Lancashire and visiting professor at Manchester University. He is our current BESS Education Committee Chairman and Secretary-elect, and is a regular guest speaker, prolific researcher, and is widely published in journal articles and book chapters with a strong focus on elbow pathology. So with nearly 100 PubMed referenced articles to his name, Professor Watts will share with us his tips and tricks for writing a paper and optimising the chances of successful submission for publication. So without further ado, I'll hand over to Mr. Thomas.
Welcome everybody to this first and inaugural BESS Journal Club meeting. I'm delighted to be here, and hopefully we'll give you a few insights into the journal, how to submit, and if you would like to become a reviewer, please come and do so, and we'll go through how to do that later in the talk. I'd just like to start with just a little bit of a history, particularly since it started in Adams Hospital with Ian Trail, and at that time, when he had his idea of starting this journal in 2008, David Stanley was the then president of BESS and Ro Kulkarni was the then secretary. So these three individuals put an awful lot of work in to get this journal established with a publisher. Ian's idea was that he wanted to develop an international journal to advance the science of shoulder and elbow disorders, but he wanted it to be a peer-reviewed articles related to shoulder and elbow surgery and uniquely rehabilitation, because there is no journal, shoulder and elbow, that has a section to do with the latter. So in order to do that, the layout of the journal started as shoulder, elbow, rehab, as you see there in those colours, and this has been maintained throughout the entire history of this journal since 2009, when it was launched at the London BESS meeting in the July of that year. We started off with Wiley Blackwell as the publishers, and then in 2014 went to Sage, who are our current publishers, and some of these slides that I'll be using are from their advice on publishing. The timing there is almost the same as the editor-in-chief. So David Stanley took over as editor-in-chief in 2015, and I took over from him in 2022. When you're looking to put an article in for publication, you want to choose a publication that's going to get you somewhere. In other words, you want something that is as good a journal as possible for your specific article. PubMed recognition is quite essential for anybody else in the field of shoulder and elbow surgery to find your article, because without that it becomes far more difficult. And Shoulder and Elbow managed to get that in 2016. Again, there is a process by which you have to go through to get PubMed recognition, and that involves a lot of hard work and jumping through a lot of hoops that they managed to do in 2016. The other thing that you need, ideally, is impact factor. And Adam might talk a little bit about this with perhaps writing a paper, because when you're in an academic unit, impact factor is very, very important for your publication. Impact factor is calculated on the citations in other journals over a 2-year period, and as yet, Shoulder and Elbow has not achieved that, even though we've been trying to get this since 2020 and before, but of course, COVID is the excuse for everything, and it's also the excuse of this. However, we are advised that we will almost certainly be getting impact factor in 2023. I can't say any more at this moment officially, but watch this space very closely. So the way in which this journal works is it has a steering committee that oversees the workings of the journal. with these representatives at the moment. So you can see there's a close association between BESS and the journal, although the journal is run independently from BESS. We have an editorial board, which are elected which are appointed by steering committee and myself. And we have associate editors, which again is a duty of the editor-in-chief. And there is a lot of these people who come, and some will then go as well. So when David stepped down in 2022, quite a few associate editors left and new ones have been appointed, which is a good, healthy way of running the journal. Most important person, however, in this entire process is the red-ringed lady at the top, which is Stella, who is the editor-in-chief's assistant and does a lot of the work and the hard drive to get your publication published and you as a reviewer to review. These are the article types that we currently have. So editorials myself, invited reviews, which are at the moment from the editorial board. Those are specifically reviewed as well by certain individuals who are appointed within the editorial board. And therefore nothing goes into the journal without being reviewed. As an author, you can submit original articles, review articles, and case reports, which will then go through the review process, which we will cover in a minute. There's an awful lot of hoops to jump through for authors. So if I take you through the process, give you an idea of how to submit an article to Shoulder and Elbow, slide by slide. Before we go there, there are a couple of important things that you need to be aware of. As Shoulder and Elbow, through SAGE, is a member of the Committee of Publication Ethics. They do have a code of ethics which you as an author need to be aware of and you as an author need to follow. This is on the website and you can read it. It's a large document, but just be aware that it is there and you need to comply by it. There is another publication, which is by the International Committee of Medical Journal Editors, and these are recommendations for conduct, reporting, editing, and publishing in medical journals. And this isn't just us, this is everything. And again, it is a recommendation of what we must do as publishers to publish your article. So if you go to the Shoulder and Elbow website, and you have two ways of accessing it. You either go directly, or if you're a BESS member, there's a link through the BESS website, and you end up with this page. If you look at the red box, submission site, and you press it, it will then take you into what's called Scholar One manuscript. To get any further, you now need to log in. Now, if you don't have a login, you have to create an account to do so. Once you've got into the account, it will then take you to, if you look at the top, there are home author review. The blue author highlighted bit is where you need to be. It will then take you through 6 steps to submit your article. You have to type, or you have to tick, sorry, what type of article you are submitting. When you come towards the end of this, you will have to do a declaration of all authors on your paper. There is a guideline for that inside the website, which you can read if you have any doubt about what to do. But the actual declaration form is as reproduced here. And it's pretty obvious and explanatory as to what you need to put into which box. Can I just draw your attention to 2 things? One is ethical approval. And this needs to be filled in properly. And please don't just put, yes, I've got it. You have to go through a committee in your hospital, your institution, and we are now an international journal. And so this particular process has caused us not grief, but problems in getting our way through impact factor, because different institutions have different ways of giving ethical committee approval. But please, in your hospital, make sure that you have this, because without this, Clarivate, who are overseeing the process of impact factor, they come down on us quite heavily if we don't have this. The other thing is, if you are in a proper trial, it is prerequisite for us to have the registration number of that trial before we can publish, or in fact, before you get through the submission process. So please make sure that each one of these is actually filled in correctly. I have a small box at the bottom of the page which shows you an example of, I think it is the Rothman Institute, which shows you what sort of information is now required. And if you do that, you can pass go and you carry on the submission. That's you completed. You jump through all your hoops. Now you hand it over to us to review the paper that you just submitted. So what is involved in the peer review process? Well, firstly, number one, paper submitted. Number two, plagiarism. And as a result of that, then you can then pass on to number three and number four. So let me just go through plagiarism. This is sort of new kid on the block, maybe, but it's been happening for a while. Only the problem is it's getting much more interesting now that non-human beings, in other words, robots, might be involved. And so when we have a paper at any stage in the process, we can ask on the website to give us a similarity index, and this will score your paper compared to any other and tell us whether yours is very similar to the others. Now, if you look at this on Google, it will tell you, oh, if you've got more than 20%, then this is likely to be plagiarism. But it's much more complex than that. If you write a paper which is about the same subject as another paper, and in that paper you have very similar references, your similarity index will go quite high, because it references it looks at the references and ups your score. So plagiarism is actually quite difficult to measure by a simple similarity index. So we do look at it. If you score 100%, you aren't going to get any further than this, and your paper will be sent back to you. But you don't tend to see anybody scoring quite that high. The other thing, which is it's a challenge now, which the publishers are currently talking to us about, is the problem of AI. And it's a challenge for them in the future to pick this up, because the AI is more intelligent than we are, by definition, I guess. But interestingly, in this other recommendation, which I've just referenced to you, they updated their recommendations in May of this year. And there's a couple of rather funny sentences, and you'll be pleased to hear that as a human being, you are still currently responsible for submitting the material. And by the way, if you do use anything AI, you mustn't list it as an author. So we humans are still, at this moment, in charge of the process. So if you get through all of that, it then comes to the desk to either say this is suitable or unsuitable for the shoulder and elbow. Vast majority will be suitable, and they will send on down the line of review. If it doesn't appear that they're in the scope of shoulder and elbow, or well outside the interest of the readership, in other words, this is probably the wrong journal for you, I will send them a letter, an email to say, this is probably not for us, perhaps you might refer it to somewhere else. If I have any doubt about that, and I'm not an expert in all the subjects that we publish in shoulder and elbow, I will, with respect to the authors, and I think we all have to bear that in mind, that somebody spent a lot of work doing papers, so it behoves us to give them that respect and at least put it through a process so that we can justify our decision. Don't just say, thanks very much, no, because that doesn't go down very well. So I will therefore then send it to an associate editor for a second opinion, and some of those associate editors will write back and say, well, actually, no, I don't think I want to send this review because X, Y, Z. I think they probably should be rejected. At which point I will then email the authors and say, look, this has been through myself and an associate editor, and we both think this. And that gives me a backup and a second opinion. And as doctors, second opinions are always quite useful to have. You then go through to the peer review process. We at Shoulder and Elbow have a double-blind peer review. In other words, the names of the authors and the reviewers are hidden. There are other forms of peer review, but this is by far the best for a journal like us. However, we have a slightly different way of doing it because our associate editors are between the reviewers and the editor-in-chief. So the process in our case is that I have 25 associate editors, and I will send the article to one of them who have declared their subspecialty interests, again on the website, but I know them anyway, so I know what they're good at and what they're used to reviewing. We have an international group of associate editors to represent the international bit of our journal, and we have countries from all over the world sending in articles. The associate editors are supposed to have about 14 days to accept the assignment and select the reviewers. That selection process can be quite difficult though, because they might select them, but we do need more reviewers, which is one of the reasons for this talk, because that can be difficult to find and difficult for the reviewers to say yes. But ideally, the associate editor will get 2 reviewers who are at that point blinded from the authorship, so they don't know who's written the paper. They then have 10 days to say yes or no, and then if they accept, they have a further 3 weeks to review the article. That is ideal. If you wish to help in that review process, and I hope after tonight you do, and you are not a reviewer, then you can apply to be one on the journal website. If you go to the main page of BESS.ac.uk, there is an application form. Hit the blue button and you fill in a form like this. Just name, details, what grade you are, and then at the bottom again, it asks you for your specialist interests. In other words, the areas of shoulder and elbow surgery that you would be happy to review. And then if you do that, you will only be sent those particular papers of that particular interest. Why should you be a reviewer? Well, there's a big long list here. I think, first of all, you'll be helping BESS and you'll be helping the journal. It will help you as well to stay up to date in your field, and it will also help you, if you are in the process of writing papers, it will help you to do so. You also will then find out what papers are being submitted in your specialist field, because not all papers are published. And you get an awful lot of insight, if you're a reviewer, into what is being submitted, because quite a lot of those will never be published. And this gives you an insight into something that your colleagues who are not reviewers won't have. Also, once you become a good reviewer, if you do really well, then it is a stepping stone to becoming an associate editor. I went through that process myself. So it is a good way of becoming an associate editor, starting off as a reviewer, associate editor, and who knows, you might become editor-in-chief one day as well. So let's go on to the reviewer process. So once you are a reviewer, you will get sent a review. You will be assigned as a reviewer by one of the associate editors. You will then get sent an email to review. You can either agree or decline. But if you accept, just remember what I just said. Ideally, you're going to be doing this review within the next 3 weeks. You then get the paper will go into your reviewer center on the website, and you can go in there, download the paper to read, and then make your decision and recommendations, not to the editor as is in this, but to the associate editor who has sent you that review to do. So the basic principles of review is please only agree to do a review if you have the expertise to do so. In other words, don't accept something that's outside your area of interest. Respect the confidentiality. You won't know who the authors are, but if you start talking about it, somebody might do, so keep it to yourself. When you do the review, please be obstructive and be objective and constructive, and don't just say something like, oh, this is a load of rubbish, reject. And if you do have any conflicts of interest within the paper, they might only be known to you. So this is a SAGE slide, and they say, you know, if you're getting consulting fees from a company, and this paper's about one of the company products, please tell that to your associate editor, because he won't know. If you've got any stocks and shares in the company, please let them know. So just be aware that there is an ethical guideline for reviewers, and please abide by it. So you've now accepted the review. Oh my God, what am I going to do next? So first of all, have a look at the paper and read the whole thing. You get an idea as to what the paper is about just by reading it without making any notes or anything like that. You can think to yourself, well, is this actually a shoulder and elbow journal, or is this, for instance, a paper on hips and knees, and there's a couple of shoulders in it as well, trying to get it into a journal? Is it significant? Would I be interested in it? Would my colleagues be interested in it? Is the title representative of what's in the text? And is it an appropriate length? It's not, 30 pages when you could do it in half a dozen. And of course, is there any message within the paper? Then I would then get out a piece of paper or do it on a computer, and I would then dissect the article, and I would go in the subheadings that the paper is written in and make comments about each of those subheadings. So look at the abstract. Is it appropriate? Does it represent what is underneath in the text? Is it clear, simple, easy to read? In the methods, are they appropriate? Are the methods actually going to give you the answers to what the title of the paper says it's going to do? Go to the results. Are the results appropriate to what was described in the methods? Are there results that are recorded in the results section that weren't actually in the methods section in the first place? And look at the data. Look at the demographics. We all know that most papers are written along a specific line. You want the data, you need the age, the gender, the side, etc., objective data, the complications of treatment, and just make sure that it's set out appropriately. Once you've done that, go to the discussion, and the discussion should be appropriate to the paper. Is it the same as other papers that have been written? Is it something different? Do the authors put their results and contrast them with other journals and their results appropriately? Have the authors achieved what they set out to achieve? And are all the cited other articles relevant, important, and indeed are there articles that were more relevant that they haven't cited? So there's a lot of work to do, but you need to go through it. And I think if you go through it section by section, that's probably the best way to do things, and you won't forget how to do it. The conclusion should be short, succinct, and should actually have a take-home message in the article. If it doesn't, then you have to then start wondering, was this article appropriate? Is it suitable for publication? So in summary, I would lay out the review as in these highlighted sections in bold red. And if you put that down in front of you, you go through it logically, sensibly. And what's more, you then feed back to your associate editor. And remember, you are giving him a review that he needs to easily assess and use to make a decision. You have two ways of feeding back things. You feed back to the authors and you feed back to the associate editor. There are two boxes that you can fill in. I've got it on this, sorry, I've got it on this slide. So there is a slide for authors, a slide for associate editors. So put in the author bit a breakdown of the paper into the different individual sections. if there are things that you would rather just say to the associate editor, like, actually, this is really a load of rubbish, and I don't really want to tell the authors that, you can do something to the associate editor which will never be seen by the authors. You then have to make a decision after your review as to whether it's accept, minor revision, major revision, or reject. You then hand that over to the associate editor. And then basically, you've done your job, and it's now up to the associate editor to take the 2 reviews that he's got in front of him and make a decision. He then has to make a decision over the reviews. Now, if you look at the bottom here, I've just reproduced a web page that we have on the site, and it has here 2 reviewers. So in the middle, there's reviews required to make decision number 2. First reviewer, which I blanked out, they may be on the call, I don't know, says reject. Second reviewer says minor revision. So that is now the reason for the associate editor now make the decision. He has to size up those 2 reviews, and he then has to recommend whether he agrees with reviewer number 1, reviewer number 2, or whether he doesn't agree with either of them. And that's the role of the associate editor. He then sends that recommendation to myself, and the associate editor might indeed, in part, review the article himself and make his recommendations as well. So we then have a process by which we have 2 reviewers, an associate editor, and then there's myself. So we are, again, being fair to the authors and showing them that we have done a good job in reviewing their article. Once that decision has been made, I then email the author. I tell them the decision that's been made, and the authors can then request access to the reviews that have been done on their article. They don't know who the reviewers are, they're blinded, but they do have a right to then look at those reviews. So again, be careful what's written in the author bit of the review. If there is a recommendation to then revise, we pass through go and we start the process all over again with a revision, and it then goes round again. So what about you as authors putting in articles for our journal? Well, here are the acceptance rates, running at about 1/3. And that is an ideal number for a journal of our size, and our, I'll say impact factor, although we haven't officially got one yet. But that is about an appropriate percentage, and our publishers advise us that we are very like other journals of our size and of our history. Once you've had it accepted, you don't immediately go into print, or in our case, go into a publication, an issue which is on the most online, but you do go on an online platform run by Sage, where your article is sitting and where you get a DOI number, and therefore it is referenced at that stage. I am aware that we have quite a long waiting list to get into an issue. It's getting shorter, and since I took over, we've done quite a good job at getting through an awful lot of extra issues to get rid of a lot of backlog. So that's another talk. The other thing you've got to bear in mind if you're putting in articles for the journal is that these are the number of countries currently submitting. You're in a minority even in the UK because the Americans are beating you at the moment. So there is an awful lot of competition to get published. Having said that, these are the current hits online, and you can see that we are increasing significantly the numbers of people reading our journal over the last few years. So I come to the questions bit, although I do have some examples of reviews if you wish to go through them, if there are no questions.
No questions.
None? Shall we go on to, so examples of reviews. So I put it here as the good, the bad, and the mediocre. And basically that's because when you submit your review back to the associate editor, he has an ability to score you. And it's basically on timeliness, but also on quality of the review. And he can score you, or she can score you, as highly relevant, sufficient, below average. So that basically means good, mediocre, and bad. Here is an example of a major revision. And as I say, this is an example of a review. I'm conscious of the fact that I can't show you articles. You know, we have data protection issues, GDPR. We've got to be very careful what I show, what is a large and, to me, anonymous audience. So this is a review. This was set out by somebody. In fact, this document arrived as an attachment. You can actually attach a Word document or even a PDF file as a review. And this is an attachment. And as you can see here, this person has done exactly what I was suggesting, in that they've broken the paper down into all the different sections of that paper. And at the very end, they've also then put general review and comments. I think that was a good one. And that was ideal and should make the associate editor's life a lot easier than getting something like this, which was, and that is exactly how it arrived on the website, cut and pasted into a box, which, although it was deemed to be a minor revision, that's not something that I think perhaps an author would be very happy to accept. I hope we all agree. So that might be the bad one. We then have, I think, again, another example of a good review, because this is just a minor revision. The language is very good. It's complementary to the author. It's easy to see that actually there's not a lot wrong with this paper. And basically, it's okay. It says typographical errors there. I have the ability to, for non-English speaking papers, there is also a box that I can tick to have the English language reviewed, not by us individually. So your role as a reviewer is not to put a badly written in English paper into English. You don't need to do that. We can do that through the publishers. So that's, I think, an example of a good review. This is also shows you something that basically doesn't need to be an extended review, but this is something that was sent from one of the associate editors who had a review that said, I can't remember whether it said fine, no problem, but the associate editor effectively overrode this and felt this was really not a paper that was suitable for shoulder and elbow, but was an oncology type paper and should go to a different journal. And I've accepted that advice and passed that on to the authors. This is a reject. I have an issue with some of the reject papers, and I can't show you some of the worst ones at all because they might give the game away as to what the paper was. But if we have a paper that we reject, I think we have an imperative to do a reasonable review so that the authors, when they get rejected, understand why they were rejected. And a 3-line review doesn't tell the authors particularly well why they were rejected. And I then have to answer the complaints by those authors that you didn't really understand the paper, you didn't really review it, you didn't do this, you didn't do that. So from my point of view, if we can get a good review of a rejected paper, that actually is almost better than a poor review of an accepted paper, if you see what I mean. So that was the review. And then that was the second review. So you can see we now have a list of things that are not in that review, but are in that review, which we can now pass on to the authors as to why we have rejected their paper and to substantiate the process by which we've just put the authors through. This was also a reject paper, but again, not quite as much detail, but again, enough to give us a reason why we've rejected their paper. I think I've passed my time, I was given 40 minutes. So can I just say, if anybody else on this thing, that if there are any editorial board members or associate editors, I'd just like to thank all of you for a lot of hard work. I've already said thank you to Stella, who I know is sitting at home watching the telly, but I think this is a team game, really, and without a good team, the game doesn't play. So thank you very much. If you are not a member of the team and really want to join it, I would thoroughly suggest you get onto that website and start applying now to become at least a reviewer and become part of what is a very good team. Thanks very much.
Thank you. We do now have one quick question, just asking how many reviewers do you generally have to invite to review a paper before you get the 2 that you're looking for, or the number that you're looking for?
It varies between 2 and not enough. In other words, we get to the stage where I and an associate editor have acted as the reviewers, because after getting into double figures requesting reviewers, they've all rejected and declined. Now, it sounds awful, but if any of you remember, I think it was about 9 months ago, the Journal of Shoulder and Elbow Surgery from America put out an advert requesting reviewers because they had run out of reviewers. They didn't have any. So all I can say is it's not unique to our journal. But the more reviewers that sign up, the better. And hopefully after this talk, you'd like to do some reviewing, and that will make everybody's life a lot easier.
Thanks. There's one other quick question that's just come in about how much experience do you need to become a reviewer?
Depends on how many areas you want to review, I guess. I mean, you know, there are some people that have written a paper themselves that are probably one of the world's authorities on whatever paper they've written. There are other people who are, you know, consultants who obviously have areas of expertise and other areas where they're not. So we are looking for people who are probably not a first year SPR, because they probably don't have the experience, but certainly the senior SPRs, the fellows, and certainly junior consultants would be ideal.
Thank you. I think there's no other questions. So thank you very much for your time.
No, that's fine. I hope that was helpful.
Yeah, that was great. Thank you. We'll hand over to Professor Watts now.
Great, thanks very much, Fiona. Thanks, Mike, for that talk. It's the job of editor-in-chief is a hard job. That, apart from all of the work that goes in it, it's all the politics of dealing with unhappy authors and that sort of thing. So thanks for all your hard work. And as Mike said, you know, what goes around comes around. If we want to have our submissions assessed and appraised in a timely manner and well, then we need to contribute to that process of reviewing and working as associate editors too. And it's been my privilege to do that over the years, and you know, hope to continue to do that for many more to come. Just before I go into my talk, I would like to just take a moment to thank Fiona for the efforts to set the journal clubs up. And obviously this one, as an introduction, it has a very different flavour from what's going to come in the future, which will be very much based on reviewing individual important papers and critiquing those. But what I wanted to do over the next 15 minutes or so is just to give an insight into how I think you should approach writing a paper, because I think it helps you to understand how to critique a paper. Much of what's going to follow is my personal opinion, and I was very conscious when I was writing this talk that it's very easy to make it all seem a bit doom and gloom and negative, and I hope it doesn't come across that way. But just bear in mind there are absolutely no rights or wrongs, but there are better ways of doing things and worse ways, and things that you can do that will likely increase your chances of acceptance. And as I say, knowing how to write helps you know how to critique a paper. And I would really encourage everybody to read this fantastic paper in the Journal of Hand Surgery European by Jeff Hooper, where he really goes into great detail about the good ways to write a paper and how to increase your chance of acceptance. It's very much focused on submissions to BESS to the Journal of Hand Surgery, but is relevant to all types of scientific writing and all journals. And there are three key elements that he highlighted there. The first question when writing a paper is you want to know is it new? So are you adding anything to the literature, or is it just an also ran, I've done the same thing and this is what I've found, in which case it's probably not really very helpful to people. Is it true? Well, that's very important, and we'll go into a bit more detail on that as I go through my talk. And does it matter? So it's all very well having, doing some research, but if it really doesn't change care or doesn't change our understanding or the management for patients, well, does it need really to be published? And so I think those are three really good questions to ask yourself when thinking about a project and writing a paper. One of the most important things when doing research is to make sure that you've written a protocol before you start. So good papers start with good research, and good research starts with a good protocol. It's very easy if you're given a project by somebody or you think of a project of your own, just to, in your enthusiasm, dive in and start collecting data. And then you start to come up against all sorts of hurdles. You realize that there's some data that's missing and you've got to go around again, or you've collected things in the wrong way. Much better to think about things ahead of time, clarify your aims and your objectives, make sure that it's thought about in great detail, clearly define the methods that are appropriate to answer the question that you want to answer. And also, before embarking on any research, consider the methods for analysis. So consider what sort of statistics you're going to undertake. And we are surgeons or we're physiotherapists. We are not experts in statistics. And if you need help, ask for help, because the best research is done through collaboration. So you've got a question, but you have no idea where to start. The first thing you should do is go to your local R&D department, because they should welcome you with open arms, first of all. But secondly, they should have availability or access to resources that will really support you in developing your research question and developing your research protocols, and therefore enabling you to do good research. But very often a very good point to start is actually to systematically review the literature. And there are useful resources to tell you how to do that. Cochrane Handbook is obviously very helpful, but is a lengthy document. I think I found the Joanna Briggs Institute very helpful for many types of review, because there are lots of different types of systematic or scoping types of review that you can do. And both of those are useful resources to access about how to synthesize data. You then need to consider whether the type of project that you're doing is research, whether it's a service evaluation, or whether it's an audit. If it's research, it's very likely that you're going to need ethical approval, but not always. And importantly, when it comes to publication, as Mike has outlined, you're going to need to have evidence of ethical approval. But even more importantly, I think, and one thing that many people come unstuck with, is that people will want to see evidence that actually you've published the protocol before completion of collecting the patient data. And many journals won't even accept the paper. So you can have done all of that work, doing a fantastic randomized controlled trial, but if you haven't taken into consideration those steps beforehand, then you'll really struggle to get it published afterwards. A service evaluation, you might not need ethics, but you also need to recognize that the results may not be generalized, and therefore they may be very specific to the type of institution that you work in. And then audit is a comparison against a standard. And if you go onto the NIHR website, you can find this table which breaks down what is research, what is service evaluation, what is clinical audit. So you can start to understand where your research project might fit in. Importantly, research is an attempt to derive generalizable and transferable new knowledge to answer a question using sound scientific methods. And that definition is really helpful, but it may not get you all the way to where you want to go. Service evaluations generally are retrospective, often retrospective reviews of your current practice, but you're not comparing them against a standard of care. If you're comparing against a standard of care, that would be typically fall into the box of being an audit. If you're not sure, then go onto the HRA decision tool kit. And I should say that all of these slides will be made available after this talk, so you don't have to make notes for any of these. We'll send around these slides so you can access them, and obviously there'll be a recording available online as well. But the HRA decision tool will take you through a series of questions in which the outcome of which will tell you whether this is a research project, and if it's a research project, does it need ethics approval for conduct in the UK? So that's a useful thing to use. And then if it is research, what sort of research is it that you're doing? Are you doing a randomized controlled trial? Are you doing an observational study, so looking at a case series, either prospectively or retrospectively? Are you doing a systematic review, or is it a case report? And really be very clear in your own mind as to what type of research it is. Because for many of these things, and if you go to the Equator Network, you'll be able to find each of these. There are accepted standards for reporting, and so when you're writing your protocol, you need to consider what information you're going to need to provide in your report that will match up with these standards. And for many journals, what they'll want to see is the actual standard for reporting checklist appended at the end of your submission to show that you've considered all of that, and actually the page number where each element has been included in your report. And always consider, is the method you're using appropriate to answer the research question that you've posed? Because again, otherwise you are wasting your time. So you need to be very clear in your own mind, but also in your writing. You need to be clear about defining the scope of the research project and the aims. So consider patients, interventions, comparisons, outcomes, and timelines. And for some projects, you may not have a comparator and outcome. Intervention and comparator. You might just have an intervention, but the same principles apply. Think about the timelines for when you're recording the outcomes. Think about the outcomes that you're using. How do you select the outcome? So for some areas, there are core outcome sets that have been defined, and so you can access those. And that's a useful, very useful if that has already been done. But you definitely want to use an outcome that has been validated for the disease or condition that you are studying. very often we'll see research projects where people have just collected sort of X number of different outcome measures because they're not sure what they should be collecting. They think the more they collect, the better. The problem with that is that you're significantly increasing the burden for the patients, but also you start to end up with conflicting results, which can lead to an even more confusing picture. So really be very thoughtful about the outcome instruments that you're going to use for the particular outcomes that have been selected. In the statistical section, and again, you know, we are not expert statisticians. Many of us who work in clinical sciences may have a working understanding of research, but we are certainly not experts, and we will normally seek expert advice when we're doing research. But a few common blunders that I see is that your data can't be summarized to a greater degree of accuracy than it was measured. So if you're measuring an X-ray in millimeters, don't provide an average of those to 0.01 of a millimeter, because it's nonsense. And you can't measure to that degree of accuracy, so you shouldn't be reporting. Same goes for age, which is probably being measured in integers, or follow up in months, for example. So bear that in mind when summarizing your data. Consider what type of data it is. So is it a continuous variable? Is it a categorical variable? Because the way you summarize that data will be different depending on those two. And if it is continuous data, is it normally distributed, or is it skewed data? And the vast majority of the time in orthopedics, a lot of the outcome data that we're collecting is actually skewed data, but also often people just apply standard parametric statistics, basically treating the data as if it was normally distributed. And of course, the assumptions that are applied don't apply to the data set that you're analyzing, and therefore you can draw incorrect conclusions from that. So do at least have a basic understanding of these principles. And one common theme that we see is that there's over-reliance on the p-value. The p-value is very rarely the answer to any question. And what we really want to know is what is the effect size and the distribution of the data. If we see an article which has been submitted where they provide the summary data, so they provide the averages, but not any information on the variance of the data, either a standard deviation, interquartile range, or minimum, at the very least, minimum and maximum values, then we can't interpret the data, and the paper is very likely to be rejected. So think about the effect size and the p-value, and what's the relevance of that is that your p-value, you can find a difference between two interventions, even if the difference between the two is very small, if you collect enough data. So if your sample size is massive, you will find a statistically significant difference, even with an infinitely small actual difference in the treatment effect between the two. So if you just report the p-value, you can be led into erroneous conclusions, because if, for example, the difference in pain score between two interventions is 1 or 0.01, depending on the scale that's being used, then it's questionable as to whether that's actually clinically significant, and therefore you could be led down to the wrong conclusions of your study. So try to report the effect size as well as p-values and the distribution of your data. Make sure your illustrations of your data are clear. So a picture can speak 1,000 words, but sometimes 1,000 words can be very confusing, and possibly 10 words would be better than 1,000. So the these 3D graphs that you can see shown here are really confusing to interpret. You're much better off with a two-dimensional representation. And when you've got discrete variables, don't try and join the dots and show it as if it's a continuous variable, because that again leads the reader to the wrong conclusions. When structuring your report, as Mike has outlined, of course, there is a standard way of doing it. The introduction, method section, results and discussion. The purpose of the introduction and discussion are very, very different. And the introduction should really be a theme setting exercise, and of course should include a very clear description of the aims of your project. It should be about 500 to 700 words in length for most journals, and the discussion should be roughly twice the length of the introduction, there or thereabouts. And of course, the discussion should be an interpretation of the findings of the project, and a description of where those findings fit into the body of literature that's been described. The abstract should be a very clear synopsis of what follows, and of course, it's really important. The title. Don't choose some obscure title that you think is going to attract attention. It's got to be clear, and it's got to do what it says on the tin, basically. So make sure that your title is clear. Choosing the authors is very important. Don't just put your boss on because you feel you should. The involvement of authors is very clearly defined, and the use of ghost authors and invited authorship is not accepted in modern scientific writing and should be avoided. I said there were no rights and wrongs, but there are some serious misconduct issues. Plagiarism clearly is bad. Fabrication of data is clearly bad, and duplication and honorary authorship, as I've explained. Any of these things are are likely to lead you in very hot water. That definitely will see retraction of your paper and possibly some more serious implications arising from that. So avoid those. And then there are things which are bad practice, but probably all too often, unfortunately, all too common. So a hypothesis after the results are known is basically a fishing exercise. So you've gone out, you've collected a whole load of data, you've analysed it, and then drawn raised your question from what you found. That's clearly bad practice and not very scientific. Selective reporting of data, and this is where actually publishing your protocol beforehand is helpful. Having conclusions which are not supported by the evidence is again very common and will be a reason for the article being sent back to you and asking you to revise it. So look at your conclusion. It needs to be very succinct, but it's got to be supported by the data that you've presented. And of course, avoid salami slicing. Which journals do you submit to? Well, choose the most appropriate audience. Impact factor is really only important if you're in an academic post, so don't worry so much about that. And do have a consideration as to whether you want open access, bearing in mind that if you do, it may cost you. And so that's an important thing to consider at the outset. Always read and follow the journal submission guidelines. So following them is the most important thing. And check the spelling and grammar and make sure your references are in the correct format. Use of reference managers is very much recommended, because if you're not successful in your first submission, you have to take it to another journal. You might have to change the format of your references, and using a reference manager will enable you to do that very easily. When submitting, just make sure that your tables and figures are set in separate files and that the quality of the images meets the journal requirements. Make sure that you've got legends for both and that they've been cited appropriately in the text and that they're not missing. Don't make your introduction or discussion too long. That's a common problem and will lead to the manuscript being sent back. Don't abuse acronyms. and sometimes articles can be almost illegible because or unreadable because of the number of acronyms that have been put in. And make sure that all the numbers add up. So the values you give in your abstract, in the results, in the tables and in the figures should be the same if they're talking about the same things, and should all add up to the totals when you're thinking about the total sample size. And lastly, and I said this wasn't going to be all negative, but I realise that it can come across but there are some personal gripes that I have. Never ever put in the words the results are trending towards statistical significance, because that is just nonsense and bad practice. Don't try and make it sound more fancy than it needs to be, because you end up using words inappropriately, utilized where you mean used. I recognize that these are some personal issues that I have. It probably says more about me than it does about the authors, but you know, these are important things. Just the language should be simple and it should be straightforward. And the results section is for the results. If you see results in the discussion, then that's not going to be accepted. It's going to be sent back to you, and so make sure that you've written things appropriately. And I'm just going to finally wrap up with the 7 sins of publication, written by PJ Benson. The first is fabrication, so don't make things up. Don't omit results in order to cheat the data. Don't let your ego get ahead of you and overstate the findings of your study, and don't put in authors that haven't been involved, but equally do acknowledge people that have been involved. And it's always bad practice, I think, to just stick your name as the senior author at the front if somebody else has done all the work. When you're writing, write for your audience, don't write for yourself. So don't assume that the reader knows everything that you do about the topic. Make sure that you've explained it well. And of course, avoid plagiarism. And the last point is forgetting to smell the roses. And what that refers to, it's the sin of forgetting the things that really matter in life. So research is all well and good. It's meant to be fun. It keeps us interested in our job and in our work. But there are more important things in life, and you've got to keep those in perspective at all times. Thanks very much indeed.
Thanks. So I don't think there's any questions as far as I can see. So I think that probably brings our first session to a close. So thanks again to both of our speakers for sharing their valuable insights with us this evening. Thanks to everyone who's dialed in to support and engage with the BESS Journal Club. And there's also Jo Hall, who you probably can't see on your screens, but she's been really helpful in terms of the logistics of the Journal Club, publicising it so you all know about it and facilitating the registration. It's invaluable support. So just a final reminder for the next Journal Club in February. There'll be lots of information going out on that in due course. And also for those of you who are not already signed up to BESS Trainee, that QR code will take you straight to the page where you can just sign up. All it does is put you on a mailing list, and that just means that you will get the newsletters and have some emails if there's anything coming up that you might be interested in dialing into or getting involved in. It's free to join, and it's open to AHP and surgeon members, students, undergraduates, all welcome. And we're done.
Thanks very much, Pete. Good night to everybody. Thank you very much to Mike as well.
Thanks very much.